All right, welcome everybody. Today I have with me the one and only Nick Bryant. He is, of course, published at the same publisher as myself. Esoteric Hollywood 3, by the way, will be out in the next few weeks, so get your signed copies at the shop. You can also get Nick's books as well in the Trine Day shop. Nick, how you doing?
I'm doing good, Jay. How you doing?
I'm doing well. It's it's a massive Trump failure, unfortunately. Not that I don't have a problem criticizing Trump, but I was hoping for better. So today we're going to be talking about an area that Nick is an expert in, which is the whole domain of Jeff Stein McEfrey, or Jeffrey Epstein, if we're now using his full name. Nick, how do you want to kick this off? And you are somewhat of an expert in this. So how did you get involved, first of all, in studying Epstein? And then we'll get into the case and where it's gone now.
I wrote a book which was published by Trine Day called The Franklin Scandal, a story of power brokers, child abuse, and betrayal. And in that book, I worked on it for 7 years, and it was about a huge child trafficking network. And in some ways, Epstein is kind of a carbon copy of the Franklin scandal. And it was published in 2009, 2010, and we couldn't get anybody to touch it. I live in New York City. I live in the mecca of publishing, and I couldn't get. And I had a lot of buddies that in media, and one helped me, but it didn't. His help was somewhat ineffectual, and no editors, no publishers wanted to touch it because I thought I could get some attention on it, but accusing the government of basically covering up a child trafficking network, in the very least, people didn't want to hear that. And so the book got published 2009, 2010, and I put all the money I had on it. I'm kind of a gambler. Not, you won't find me in casinos, but I moved to New York City in 1995. I'd been an academic for 5 years, and I moved to New York City in 1995 to start a freelance writing career. And I didn't get I said to myself, what should I get, like a part-time job or something like that? And I said, no, I'm going to dedicate every day to getting writing gigs. And if I end up in the park, I end up in the park. Well, that time I did not end up in the park. Actually, I ended up in a pretty nice apartment. So in 2009, 2010, I had about a year's worth of money, and I just said, I'm going to focus on trying to sell the Franklin scandal. And then I couldn't find anybody to touch it. And I worked and worked and worked. And I had friends that had their own columns in newspapers, guys that I'd known since I'm from Minneapolis, guys that I'd known back in Minneapolis, and they still wouldn't touch it. And actually, I knew that most of my friends were going to be spineless, and most of the people in the media were going to be spineless, but I didn't think all of them were going to be spineless. And only one of them has apologized to me, and I think that that's really cool. And we're good friends today. But he said I could have helped you more, Nick, and I'm sorry I didn't. Anyway, I started seeing these articles about Epstein, and it was very obvious that he had a voracious appetite for underage girls. And then I looked at the grand jury that found that he wasn't. Well, I knew that there was a grand jury that found that he hadn't abused a single child. So that got on my radar really quickly of something that I needed to investigate. And at a certain point, I had some extra money, and I flew down to Florida. And this was 2002. And then I got his black book. And
That early in 2002?
yeah, I got the
Wow.
black book in
Wow.
2012. And then I started calling. And the black book has well over 100 Epstein victims too. So
Yeah.
I started calling victims, and they were telling me that they were being flown around, and they were also telling me about an island. And at that point, I was, I think, the only journalist to know that Epstein was running a network and he had an island. And so I came back to New York City, and I was pitching the black book, and no one wanted to touch it. I mean, nobody wanted to touch it. And it was the same cognitive dissonance that I experienced when I was pitching Franklin. I would talk to these editors, and I would talk to these publishers, And they would say that I could just see them thinking, this is a really horrible story. I need to help Nick Bryant. Or I can take door B, which is I can write Nick Bryant off as crazy and I can have a nice dinner with my family tonight. And they all took door B. And then finally, I met John Cook, who was the editor-in-chief of Gawker at that point, and which has since been sued into oblivion. And he was willing to do it. And I said, we need to redact the people's numbers. And we also need to redact the victims' last names and their numbers. And he was cool with that. So we published the Black Book. And then at that point, I had flight logs too. I was the first guy to release flight logs. And I wrote an article about the flight logs in the Black Book, and we put them both up. And then, now here's what's kind of interesting. So once the Black Book was up, the floodgates opened on the Black Book. And every major media started to talk about the Black Book. And one guy, I think it was Mother Jones, called every name in the Black Book. And of course, everybody said, I don't know. I don't have anything with Epstein. But anyway, only 2 mainstream media outlets even acknowledged that it was me that ushered the Black Book to the internet. And I don't know, maybe you get accused of this, but on public media or social media, people say, well, Nick Bryant's just in here to control the narrative. And he's obviously a limited hangout. And I put the Black Book on the internet and I didn't redact anybody's names. And 2 publications even acknowledged that it was me. So I didn't do a very good job of controlling the narrative on the Black Book. And then I just started, and at that point, or a little bit down the road, I'd met some Epstein victims, and then I started talking to them. And what they were telling me was in a lot of ways, it was similar to the Franklin Network. And I couldn't believe that the government was covering this up again in broad daylight in front of everybody, and like it's trying to do now. And at that point, I started a protest. I put together a demonstration against, this is during Ghislaine Maxwell's trial, which was really perfidious. There were only 4 victims that were called, and those 4 victims had been exclusively molested by Epstein and Maxwell. And the U.S. attorney overseeing that trial also oversaw the Diddy grand jury. So again, we see people getting recycled. Donald Barr covered up the Franklin scandal when he was the attorney general under Bush 1, and then he covered up the Franklins
and he of course makes a appearance right away in Whitney Webb's book in volume 2, and she notes that his dad was OSS, right, Barr Senior. So we have from the very beginning the connections to the intelligence agencies, and this I think applies to Epstein as well, right? We have Epstein being basically an owner of multiple passports. We have people from, Acosta says years ago, I was told not to touch this guy, he's intelligence. That plays a huge factor in this, I'm sure, right?
Yes. And
I'm going to put you on something crazy real quick. Most of these Zoomer gym bros are consuming macro-guzzling synthetic dyes and synthetic sweeteners on the daily. They don't even know it. Goofy AF. There's nothing great about that. Do not listen any further unless you are an alpha or sigma male. This is important and there could be consequences. There's a new certified sigma male pre-workout powder for sigmas only. It is guaranteed to empower you to dominate your co-workers, fire your boss, aggressively gamble, or invade a small village. Chad Mode stands out from the crowd by excluding artificial flavors, preservatives, sweeteners, and dyes. We've even avoided so-called natural flavors, which are actually not natural at all, ensuring a clean and effective formula. Experience the pure goodness of Chad Mode, colored with organic blue spirulina extract, organic lemon, cherry, and organic maple crystals. Forget synthetic caffeine made in a sketchy Chinese lab. Embrace the natural power of organic green coffee bean extract, which will get your mind going and pump you up to the max. Chad Mode is made in America with all clean ingredients, the first clean pre-workout of its kind. Why are these people adding synthetic sweeteners to every single pre-workout when there are many studied downsides to consuming nasty fake sucralose? Each dose of Chad Mode contains the kick of a cup and a half of coffee, delivering a surge of energy alongside essential vitamins, minerals, amino acids, and herbal extracts. Chad Mode will allow you to fire your boss and dominate anyone who opposes you. Chad Mode will make you more dominant in your daily life, so proceed with caution. It's as simple as mixing 1 or 2 scoops of our fine powder into water or juice, providing you with a delicious, energizing beverage featuring a burst of sweet organic fruit flavor. Chad Mode will give you the extra edge you desperately crave. Don't miss out. Secure your supply of Chad Mode on TikTok Shop with a limited time massive discount. Elevate your workouts and supercharge your days. Chad Mode, not for your average gym bro zoomer who consumes synthetic blue dyes on the daily. Buy on the TikTok Shop now with a massive discount provided by TikTok for a very limited time. Buy now while this is still available, or go to chalk.com and use code in caption. Chad Mode has been flying off the shelves because it's the first of its kind, certified for alpha males only. Do not buy if you are a beta. We will refund your money.
Back to what you were saying about intelligence connections.
Well, William Barr is definitely an intelligence. He, on his whitewashed Wikipedia pages, he says that he was in the CIA for a number of years. And it's also interesting that his father hired Jeffrey Epstein.
Yeah, exactly.
To teach at Dalton School, and Jeffrey Epstein was a college dropout from a blue-collar family. His dad was a gardener for the city of New York. And after the demonstration, I'd met Epstein victims during the demonstration and after the demonstration. And then at that point, I could see that the government was going to cover this up. And I started Epstein Justice, what we're trying to do is get a Truth and Reconciliation Commission from Congress to actually investigate Jeffrey Epstein. This is something that needs to be investigated.
And when we go back to his background, I think this is really crucial because I did an interview with a friend of mine who's a Cold War historian buff, and he went deep into even getting into like the KGB archives in terms of some of the colonels in the KGB files and information that they had on Epstein that was only recently translated in English. And what's interesting is that even the KGB knew that Maxwell Sr., Robert, was this sort of odd international, mega cutout, you could say, for British intelligence, it seems like, as well as other intelligence agencies, Mossad as well. So there's sort of like this higher level game that sort of plays above the dialectic of East and the West and the Cold War. And I want to ask you the question, do you think that probably what happened here was that you had, Maxwell and Ghislaine sort of running this operation that he had sort of perfected in the Cold War, and then they recruited Jeffrey into being kind of the newer, updated version of the same blackmail operation?
That's an entirely plausible scenario. Ari Ben-Menashe says that Maxwell hooked Epstein
Mossad
up with because he thought that they would be sweethearts together, and then ultimately that Ghislaine was inundated with Israeli intelligence or Mossad. And not only that, we have Alexander Acosta. Well, Alexander Acosta, as you said, was told, he was a U.S. attorney for Southern Florida, and he was told to stand down on Epstein because Epstein was intelligence. Now, if you look at how our government functions, there's only 2 people in our government that can tell a U.S. attorney to stand down. I went to a number of legal scholars, and I talked to them about this. There's 2 people, the Attorney General and the President. And the Attorney General at that time was Alberto Gonzales, and the President was George Bush, too. So, and Alberto Gonzales, as an Attorney General, he's not going to cover up a nationwide pedophile network unless his boss tells him to. I mean, he's not going to preemptively do that. And his boss obviously told him to. So in 2007, we saw the Bush administration just completely quash this. And then every administration after that has continued to cover it up. And when Epstein was arrested the second time at Teterboro Airport in 2019, and this is where we started getting into problems with the Trump cover story. The FBI opened up his safe the next day, and they took out a lot of discs, and according to Business Insider, they took out hard drives too.
Yeah, that's those pictures we've seen where they're carrying out, right, these stacks, and you've got these CD-ROMs, right?
And the New York Times reported that there were hundreds, possibly thousands, of images of child abuse material. So when that strange memo came out last week that no one signed, no one was willing to sign, I did agree with some of the things. I do believe that there were over 300 gigabytes of child abuse material taken out of Epstein's safe. But here's the thing. Bondi was going to release the quote-unquote Epstein files or Epstein list. It was on her desk. And then she released a nothing sandwich. And I do get a kick out of it. I released more incriminating information on Epstein in 2015 than she released in 2025. Right. The Black Book, I saw a copy of the Black Book that was released and everybody's name was redacted.
Yeah, I remember finding a couple of years ago, and it must have been the one that, and I think it was from that Mother Jones thing, because it has to be the one that you originally had put up, and it had all the names still there and the numbers still there. So when everybody saw this, it was like, what the hell is this? You know, this folder psyop photo shoot that they did a year ago, a few months ago. This you know, these prepackaged binders that they gave out, that was so ridiculous.
With the influencers, and
yeah,
you'll notice that none of those influencers have screamed for any kind of truth since then. I guess they know where their bread is buttered. But Bondi, her first lie was that she wanted us to believe that the FBI and whatever dark, malignant corner of intelligence deploys people like Epstein hadn't looked at that stuff that had been taken out of Epstein's safe. I mean, that they had to look at it all. They've been looking at they were looking at it the day they took it out. They were looking at it. They probably didn't even sleep because there were a number of people that were looking at it. So that is a complete fabrication on her part. And then she said, well, I was bamboozled by the FBI. And so that either shows that she's lying or inept. I mean, depending upon how you want to look at it. And I would kind of lean towards inept. She kind of reminds me of a Stepford attorney general. Anyway, so with her, and then she got herself into deeper water when she said, I will redact, the only thing that will be redacted is things that could have a bearing on national security. Now she has to explain to us what a bunch of child molesters have with national security. So she kept on digging herself deeper and deeper and deeper. And then the memo came out, that strange memo. And I do agree that there was over 300 gigabytes of child abuse material taken out of Epstein's closet. And I do agree that there were over 1,000 Epstein victims. I agree with those things. I adamantly disagree that Jeffrey Epstein molested all those girls by himself. And I adamantly disagree that Jeffrey Epstein wasn't involved in blackmail. And the Trump administration put a white elephant in the living room by saying that they were going to release the files and how profuse those files were. And then they decided to kill the white elephant. But the problem is, the white elephant might be dead, but it's still in the living room.
Yeah, this was such an optics nightmare idiot. It was so stupid to do. I can't fathom how, I mean, yeah, I don't know if it's incompetence or just if it's boomers who don't understand how media works now, that like they're not understanding that this isn't going to work. And like, I haven't seen anybody buying this except for, you know, Israel Firsters, Ben Shapiro. I mean, it's like only people that are buying this is people like that. So I don't know what they. It's just a disaster from every perspective, but maybe they're forced into it, right? I mean, in other words, if it is real high power blackmail material, then it absolutely makes sense that calls were made, threats were made, people were told you better not release this. You know, who knows what all is in there and who's implicated. But you know, we have Ehud Barak visiting Epstein's residence in New York, 8 times or so, according to the mainstream and Israeli media. I mean, it's pretty obvious what's going on here, and you being expert in the Franklin scandal and this one as well. I mean, I'm sure you see all these parallels. Before we go on to the blackmail stuff and what you're getting at with Bondi, I did want to ask something that nobody's really bringing up, which is in the first few chapters of Whitney's book, which is the economics Wall Street area connection. Nobody's really talking about how a lot of his early machinations comes out of, you know, Bear Stearns and these big Ponzi scheme collapsing entities on Wall Street back in the 80s and 90s, and that Maxwell was this sort of vulture capitalist takeover expert. Is there something maybe in the economic Wall Street realm that's a big part of this, that people are just only fixating on, you know, Bill Gates going to the island or something like that? Is there something else maybe that's a huge angle to this that you think maybe people are missing?
Absolutely. When I initially got into this, and Les Wexner, who's a billionaire, head of L Brands, gave Jeffrey Epstein power of attorney. I think it was in 1987, over his entire empire. He just basically gave Jeffrey Epstein the keys to his kingdom. And I can't believe this. I mean, the mainstream media has been so disingenuous about this, about Epstein. But Vanity Fair, which one would think of as a relatively sophisticated magazine, said that Les Wexner, I mean, and they said this, I mean, the difference between truth and fiction is fiction has to make sense. But Vanity Fair said the reason why Les Wexner gave Jeffrey Epstein power of attorney over his vast fortune is because he was lonely. He was lonely. And then you've got Leon Black, head of Apollo, who Jeffrey Epstein was also pandering children to and is just an all-around scumbag. He gave Jeffrey $160 million. And now, there were a couple of media outlets that reported on this, not just Vanity Fair. I mean, I don't know if Vanity Fair, but there were these media outlets reported that Leon Black gave Jeffrey Epstein $160 million because Jeffrey Epstein was helping him with his taxes.
Yeah, right. Yeah, the cover stories are so ridiculous.
I mean, Leon Black probably has 2 or 3 floors of accountants, so he doesn't have to pay a penny more than he in taxes, which probably isn't very much. Probably you and I pay more taxes than Leon Black. But initially I thought this was all blackmail. I mean, that was my idea of it, because I'd seen it happen in the Franklin scandal.
Right.
But I'm actually thinking that Jeffrey Epstein was cleaning money, that he was cleaning dirty money.
Yes.
He was cleaning dirty money through Wexner. He was cleaning dirty money through Leon Black, and God knows who else he was cleaning dirty money through. So that is a major component of this. Les Wexner didn't give him power of attorney because he was lonely. Leon Black didn't give him $160 million because he's helping out. He's cleaning dirty money.
Yeah, that's a great point. Like these connections that are ignored and really covered up in the media, especially in regard to Wexner. I think those are big indicators. The whole early phase of being at Wall Street's a huge indicator. Also, too, those odd connections with Khashoggi and, you know, arms dealing individuals, like you're not involved in all of that if you're just some sort of, you know, low level, degenerate guy who's, just sleeping around, which is how they're trying to portray it now. Like, he's just, this one bad apple degenerate or something. No.
Well, he did have him and Khashoggi, a notorious arms dealer who was ultimately murdered. and he was connected to BCCI and
Right.
all kinds of CI malfeasance. So Epstein is ensconced in this intelligence operation where
Yes.
he's not only blackmailing people, but I think he's also cleaning people's money.
Right. Exactly.
Because as we know, the CIA has various funding mechanisms that are quite dirty, and someone has to clean that money. And I knew someone who knew William Colby. He was the director of the CIA, and during the 70s, there were the church hearings,
Vietnam, and all that Phoenix program.
And he came out and he talked about the Phoenix program, COINTELPRO, all kinds of other malfeasance, the assassination programs that were. And William Colby, I think, as far as a CIA director goes, he wasn't a bad guy. As far as the CIA director goes, now that's a lot of latitude. But William Colby had told someone who I believe he had two main regrets about his time in the CIA. And here's a guy that oversaw the Phoenix program, which was unbelievably evil. But his two main regrets were that the CIA created its own funding mechanisms, so it didn't have to listen to Congress. And the reason why the CIA decided to do that is, and I understand this to a certain degree, Joseph Stalin had the hydrogen bomb. And Joseph Stalin was an individual that really didn't put much of a premium on human life. So I can understand why the CIA would think, well, now that Stalin has the hydrogen bomb, fighting communism is too important to be left to politicians. So I understand that. And they started creating their own funding mechanisms. And Colby regretted that. And he said that we just should have, in retrospect, we shouldn't have done that because it gave us too much autonomy. And he also said to this individual that he had kind of re-embraced Catholicism.
Yes, I'm aware of that. Yeah, and that might have been why he met, a mysterious demise on his boat, where he seems to have disappeared when he was out boating one day. Do you think that's a little sus?
Well, I mean, the story. I just want to say one thing else, and this really could have gotten him in trouble. He had strong misgivings about what the CIA had done to children. That's the other thing.
Right.
And I don't think this individual who said that was lying. William Colby went canoeing in April. He was under the weather and he didn't have any shoes. So, I mean, if people think that he fell out of his canoe and drowned, and then they found his body basically where they found the canoe some days later. So it was, I mean, this is just my extrapolation. I think that he was worked over a little bit and found out whoever was working him over wanted to find out what he talked to about
and Maxwell had a boating accident too, right? Or that's the story, at least. Yeah.
He fell out of his yacht. Now I've been told that Ghislaine Maxwell's father, he had a publishing empire and he pilfered the retirement savings of all the workers. And I've been told by Ari Ben Menashe, and some of the stuff that he says is really right on, and some of it isn't. But he said that Maxwell he wanted to pay that money back, and that he was trying to leverage the Israeli intelligence, the Mossad. And when you try to blackmail intelligence agencies, it doesn't really work very well.
Right.
That's what brought about his debate.
Yeah, I mean, I could see that. Now that pilfering retirement is interesting because this seems to pop up a lot in these scandals, which I'm sure you're very familiar with. You've noticed that. I don't know if you've read Paul Williams' book on Gladio, because that one's fascinating, where he ties in the Colby side of that era of the Cold War, where Colby was really in a way adjacent to Gladio, and the drug funding that went into that. But he also notes that that when when this was set up in Italy, the way that he alleges Kissinger set it up was that they had this sort of structure where the P2 Lodge and various, like Licio Gelli and other members of that Masonic order, they were able to blackmail a lot of the Italian politicians and Curia, and that in the Banco d'Ambrosio scandal, there was also the pilfering of people's retirements. So this seems to be a recurring pattern too. Is like there's blackmail, but the blackmail isn't just blackmail. There's also, usually attendance with that some form of economic crime.
Well, these people are predatory psychopaths. I mean, they don't care if they take someone's retirement pension.
Sure.
It's not going to be a big deal to them. I mean, if they're willing to pander children and molest children,
yeah, exactly.
Stealing people's retirement pensions aren't going to be a big deal to them. So getting back to that strange memo that was released by the Department of Justice and the FBI last week that no one signed, it said that Epstein molested over 1,000 girls by himself, that he didn't have any help, didn't pander any of them, had no role in CIA blackmail. And they must think that Americans are really, really stupid. Because when about 2 months after Epstein offed himself, or ostensibly offed himself, depending upon your perspective, the New York Times published an article, and it named 6 of Epstein's pimps. One was Ghislaine Maxwell, one was Sarah Kellen, and this was when Maxwell had been arrested. One was Ghislaine Maxwell, Sarah Kellen, Leslie Groff, Adriana Ross, Nadia Marcinkova, and Haley Robson. And actually, Robson admitted to that journalist that she had plundered her high school to get underage girls for Jeffrey Epstein to molest. But Kellen, Groff, Ross, and Marcinkova, they know what went on. They were integral to Jeffrey Epstein's machine. And as far as pimping the girls and the logistics of it, they were integral. And we've known about their names. If we just took that New York Times article from August of 2019, that would give the Department of Justice enough information to start indicting Kellen, Groff, Ross, and Nadia Marcinkova. There's enough information in that article to indict them. And once they were, and child trafficking is a heavy sentence in the federal system. It's 15 years to life. And you charge them with 5 or 6 counts of child trafficking, which wouldn't be easy because they were trafficking children for years. And they were looking at 5 or 6 lifetimes in prison. They'd roll over on the perps in a heartbeat if they thought they could be protected. So just that in and of itself is enough information to completely wipe out what that document is saying that Jeffrey Epstein did.
Yeah, that's amazing. Now, what do you think about this recent story that Ghislaine is saying that she will tell everybody everything? Is this silly? Is this real? What do you think's going on here?
In the Franklin scandal, there were 2 pimps. One was Lawrence King of Omaha, and one was Craig Spence of Washington, D.C. Spence ended up killing himself, and I do believe a lot of people on the internet have speculated that Spence was suicided. I do believe that he was told either you can kill yourself or we can kill you, because Spence went to the Ritz-Carlton in Boston. He was in a tuxedo, and he wrote a number of things, and then he took an overdose of nortriptyline, which is a antidepressant. Now, King, when this started to break with King, he was picked up by U.S. Marshals and taken to the federal hospital in Springfield, Missouri. And that's just called the hospital. And strange things. I mean, I've been told that strange things happen at the hospital. And when King, I do believe this is what happened. King, you've done some good work for us. You've managed to blackmail a lot of people. You know, we've let you molest kids to your heart's content, but you're going to have to do some time for your financial crimes, because he took $40 billion from the Franklin Credit Union. But I think a lot of that money was diverted to Iran-Contras. But anyway, they said to King, you're going to have to keep your mouth shut, and then we'll put you up in a really nice federal prison, and then when you get out, we'll give you a no-show job. And he was put in Rochester, the Rochester, Minnesota federal prison, which is kind of known to be club-fed. A lot of high-ranking mafiosi and other. Jim Baker was incarcerated there. Lyndon LaRouche was incarcerated there. And actually, at that time, I had a buddy that was incarcerated there. My buddy was a dispenser of herbal life, as we called it, but otherwise called by the federal government marijuana. And he got busted with a fairly large quantity of marijuana, and he ended up, and it was a nonviolent drug offense, marijuana, but he ended up still getting 5 years, and he was there. And I checked him out one day. I visited him, and I saw Jim Baker, and actually there was Joey Aiuppa. He had been the boss of the Chicago Mafia for quite some time. I got to meet Joey too, so it was definitely a very interesting cast. But King was there at the same time my friend was there, and my friend said that King was, I mean, you could tell he was a con man, but this is kind of interesting. The other high-profile victim or criminals there wanted nothing to do with King, and I think that they knew that he was working with the government.
Yeah,
so
right.
I think, but then King got let out, and he married a new beard, and then he had a no-show job at Alexandria, Virginia, scholarship. And then he lives in a nice townhouse in Reston, Virginia. I went and visited him, and he wasn't really enthralled about talking to me. And what really troubles me about King, Lawrence King, is there are people in the government that know he's a super predator. I mean, he's a great white shark. And he inveigled himself into Granville Academy. And when I found out about that, I found out that Granville Academy isn't even a school. It's not even an academy. It takes lower socioeconomic children on field trips. And I thought, this is a very, very bad idea.
Yeah, it's a nightmare.
So I called Granville Academy. I had other people call Granville Academy, and then he got booted out of there. And then he ended up on the Washington Redskins event committee, and I thought that was a bad idea too. And then the Washington Redskins event committee was inundated with phone calls, and then he was kicked out of there. And then I found out that he was at Opera Nova, which it serves a number of functions, but it teaches lower socioeconomic children how to sing. I thought that was really a bad idea. So I got him kicked out of there. And now he's at a church that I can't seem to get him kicked out of. So, and here's what's troubling about that. This guy has molested God knows how many children. And it's up to a journalist to protect children from him instead of the federal government.
Right.
And there are feds that know how predatory this guy is. So it's really, I mean, that's really an egregious situation.
And you're saying that those two pimps, analogous maybe to Ghislaine now?
Yeah. That Ghislaine was told, if you keep your mouth shut, you'll do about 10 years. And they put her in dormitory living really quickly. Usually inmates that end up in dormitory living have been there a while. They've been exemplary prisoners, and they can see the end of their sentence coming up. So I think that was the deal. I think King and Maxwell took the same deal. And I think that Spence and Epstein took the same deal too. But they ended up dead.
So yeah, so basically, Ghislaine's saying now that she will tell the true story is just nonsense, just media nonsense.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much coming out now that is, there are so many fabrications that are being manufactured at this point. It's people are blaming Bondi. I mean, Bondi said what Trump obviously told her to say, or else she wouldn't.
Yeah, right.
So, and then, so we've got this narrative of Kash Patel and Bongino wanting to resign because of what Bondi said. Well, I mean, if Bondi said it, Trump told her to say it. I mean, that's pretty much that simple. So they wouldn't, if they resign, they're not rebelling against Bondi. They're rebelling against Trump.
Do you think that some of the rumors going around are that there was just too much deep state, incriminating information, high-powered people, that it would, quote, bring down the government? Is that really what's going on here in your mind as to why it was covered up?
Yes, there's a lot of powerful people involved. When I got the Black Book, a bunch of the names were circled, and that was because Epstein's house manager, Alfredo Rodriguez, circled names that he thought were in cahoots with Jeffrey Epstein as far as his pedophilic pandering enterprise. And Ghislaine Maxwell's name is circled, and then Virginia Giuffre and Ghislaine Maxwell, they locked horns in a defamation suit. And ultimately, Maxwell gave Giuffre millions of dollars. We don't have a number on it, but she was given millions of dollars. So Rodriguez circled Maxwell, and Giuffre named it Maxwell. Rodriguez circled Ehud Barak, and Virginia Giuffre named Ehud Barak. Rodriguez circled Les Wexner, and Virginia named Les Wexner as an abuser. Same with Alan Dershowitz, same with Bill Richardson. And then there's people that are circled in the Black Book that Virginia didn't name. And then there's other people that Virginia named, like the former majority leader, George Mitchell. Virginia said that she was molested by him. And he seems like a benign grandfatherly type, but I believe Virginia. And what you can tell when you look at the Black Book and you start deciphering it, how many contact numbers did Epstein have for these people? And that will give you an indication. Like with Mick
yeah,
Singer,
like some of the numbers had it was like 4 or 5, phone numbers. And it's like, how is there so many phone numbers?
He had like 8 or 9 for Mitchell. He had 12 for Trump, and for Clinton he had 25. So obviously, Epstein and Clinton were in contact quite a bit. So, that's another indication of how many, how he or these perpetrators and Epstein were connected is by how many.
There was also, I remember reading through there. I read most of the Black Book one night. It was a lot of hotels and spas too. That was interesting.
Yes. But when you think about this, think about the pilots, the limo drivers, all of these people that were privy to this, and there would be, and you could indict all of them. I mean, we know who the pilots,
exactly,
who some of the limousine drivers are. We could indict them, and they would roll over in a heartbeat. This would be like one of the easiest RICO cases that's ever been prosecuted by the Department of Justice. The Department of Justice just doesn't have the will. So what you're saying is, yes, there are powerful people in that Epstein was pandering children to, but also, and this is one of the reasons why Franklin was immaculately covered up. According to state and federal authorities, not a single child had been abused by the Franklin Network, which is kind of mind-boggling. But I think we're looking at a political system where blackmail is endemic.
Exactly.
I think that is also what's being protected. And there was a really gutsy federal legislator named Tim Burchett from Tennessee. He's in the House of Representatives, and he basically came out and said, my colleagues are being compromised in honeypots or honey traps. So that's still going on. And these guys nothing makes people stupid like lust, arrogance, and greed.
That's what I was going to ask next is, I mean, if you're a high profile person, if you're a billionaire, you're some sort of British royalty, I mean, is there not some sort of awareness or discernment that maybe if I'm going to this thing, I might be being compromised? I've wondered this ever since, coming in contact with your book and, a lot of these cases. I read a book recently that was just a history of sexpionage. And this is sort of way older than what we know about. They were getting honey traps thousands of years ago in ancient empires. And I'm just wondering, like, is there no like debriefing of powerful people that if you're a fat ugly slob and this beautiful Russian model walks up to you, maybe you're being, what I mean?
Here's the thing about that. Political blackmail is as old as our republic. Alexander Hamilton was having an affair with a 23-year-old who was married, and her husband,
there we go,
Alexander Hamilton. And Alexander Hamilton and Thomas Jefferson had a tremendous amount of antipathy towards each other. So when Jefferson got elected, this muckraker who outed Hamilton felt like Jefferson owed him an appointment in his administration, and Jefferson wouldn't do it. So he outed Jefferson for having sex with his slave, Sally Hemings. And we do know from DNA that the Jefferson lineage is in the lineage of these children from Sally Hemings. So political blackmail, and the reason why political blackmail isn't talked about, people are very naive about it because the media doesn't report on it, because a number of people in the media are compromised.
But wouldn't powerful families and people be aware of this? That's what I don't understand. Is like, did nobody give Prince Andrew, some sort of talk like, beware, this is a reality. You know what I mean?
Well, they could have done that, but then once Prince Andrew's limbic system kicked in.
Okay, well, true, good point.
And I'll give you a couple of examples of that. Larry Craig was hardcore family values, right-wing Republican from Idaho. He was in Washington, D.C. for 25 years, first as a representative, U.S. representative, and then as a senator. And I wrote a book called Confessions of a D.C. Madam, The Politics of Sexualizing Black, with a guy named Henry Vinson.
Henry Vinson, yeah.
And Craig was a frequent flyer at Henry's escort service. And then there was a documentary that came out called Outrage by Kirby Dick, who's a pretty renowned documentary maker. And he showed how all these right-wing politicians, or a number of right-wing politicians, that are closeted, vote against gay rights. And Craig was getting escorts from people other than Henry Vinson. And then he was in a Minneapolis airport, and he was in the bathroom, and there's a gay type of signaling where someone slaps their foot on the floor, and then that signals to the other person that, let's get it on. And Craig, a senator who's been in Washington, D.C. for 25 years, tried to pick up a vice squad cop in a bathroom at the Minneapolis International Airport. Now, how hard would it be for that guy to be compromised? I mean, a kid doing an after-school extra credit with a smartphone could compromise him.
Okay, yeah.
Good point. I just want to say this. I'm from Minneapolis, and I go back to Minneapolis about once a year to see my friends and family. And I was sitting on a commode in a Minneapolis restroom. And the guy in the stall next to me was slapping his foot on the ground. And I thought he had like a neurological disorder. I mean, I felt bad for him. I'm just glad I didn't say, "Could I help you?" Or else,
Yeah. So basically, I guess the moral there is with people that are sort of they're sort of out of control, right? And so they really just can't control in these situations, right?
well, I got to a blackmail photographer for the Franklin that worked for the Franklin Network, and it was when I was trying to get my mind around it all. I mean, I'd never come across anything like this before. There wasn't a book about it. I mean, John DeCamp had written a book, but I didn't. It wasn't very. I didn't think it was very informative, and I mean, it showed that something had gone down in Omaha. I felt, but not the bigger network. And then when I realized how big this network was, and that it was involved with blackmail, and it was involved with intelligence,
Right.
I was talking to the blackmail vet, and I just said, "Well, how does this work?" And he said to me, "Once you're compromised, it's like you're on a yacht. It's a beautiful yacht, and it's a beautiful day, and you can have anything you want on the yacht. But if you decide to get off the yacht, the people on the yacht are going to make sure that you drown.
Okay, that makes sense. Yeah.
So once you're compromised, it's going to help your career." I mean, Dennis Hastert was a pedophile going
Right.
back 40 years, Speaker of the House for 7 years. So I believe, and actually the FBI knew about, according to Sibel Edmonds, the FBI knew about his shadow life when he was Speaker of the House, but they gave him a pass. And I think that he's an example, and there's other examples that I know of people that were compromised, and it was really advantageous to their career.
Yeah, exactly. So there's not really any incentive to not when you can be fed the vice that you have, and then if you don't want to stay on the yacht, you're going to have a boat accident, which many people have had boating accidents, right? So, yeah. Now, your book is, of course, about the Franklin cover-up. Are you going to write an Epstein book?
I'm working on an Epstein book right now. I've been so busy. I've got a lot written about Epstein, and I've got some stuff on Epstein that no one else has
Right,
got.
right. I figured you would. Yeah, you're a pioneer of this.
So I've been working on, but I'm also the director of Epstein Justice, which is taking off right now. And I've been working really, really hard to get Epstein Justice off the ground. And with Epstein Justice, what we want is a Truth and Reconciliation Commission by our Congress to look at Jeffrey Epstein and do an independent investigation of Jeffrey Epstein. And this isn't going to be easy. What we want is not going to be easy. But I think why we're seeing so much blowback with Epstein is Americans have eaten a lot of shit as far as lies by the government. But
Right.
the trafficking of children is a bridge too far for them. And that's why I believe we're seeing what we're seeing right now with the blowback with Epstein is, and you're seeing a lot of people flee MAGA too, because they wanted the truth about Jeffrey Epstein. This was something that was very, very important to them. And we're not getting the truth about Jeffrey Epstein. The Trump administration wanted to just shut it down. And that's not going to be possible because, as I said, the white elephant might be dead, but it's still in the living room. And I don't think there's going to be any way for us to get the white elephant out. And I've been at this a while, and it's usually people on the right that are very concerned about child trafficking. I mean, I know that is a gross generalization, but when I was writing the Franklin scandal, I got sealed grand jury documents, sealed grand jury testimony. I got a lot of information, and most of that information came from people from the right. I approached people on the left that were privy to a lot of Franklin things, and they didn't want to talk to me. So this is a major issue for people on the right, but now we're starting to get people on the left engaged too. I was on a podcast this morning of I don't know, for lack of a better word, a progressive publication. And the woman said to me, why are people so outraged about this? And that's how lost she is. I mean, why are people so outraged about this? It's because children are getting molested with impunity. And
Right.
I'll give you an idea of how egregious this problem is. According to the Centers for Disease Control, 25% of underage girls and 5% of underage boys have been molested. Now, people in the field, and I've really gotten to know a lot about child trafficking, and I've spoken at some very big child trafficking conferences, and I've gotten to know a lot of people involved with that. And there's some really good people in this field, and then there's people that, but there are some really good people in this field. And but according to the CDC, when you look at the number of boys and number of girls that have been molested when they were underage, 5% for boys is way conservative. But if you could just go with those numbers, you've got over 50 million Americans that have been molested as
Wow.
they were underage. And then, according to the Department of Health and Human Services, they did a study, and they found that 240,000 to 325,000 women and children are trafficked in the United States every year. Now, here's where we really get into it, where it just shows how children's rights are just trampled on. So if we go with the most conservative number from the Department of Health and Human Services, which is 240,000, there was every year the Federal Human Trafficking Report comes out, and the last one was for 2023. There were 664 individuals nationwide that were charged with child sex trafficking. 664 individuals. So if you take the lowest number from the Department of Health and Human Services, 240,000, we're not even charging, we're charging a fraction of 1% of the people that are trafficking children. And millions of hours of child abuse material are on the internet, millions. And according to the US Sentencing Commission, 1,375 individuals were convicted for crimes entailing child abuse material in 2023. So again, it's a fraction of 1%. And you've got millions of Americans that have been molested, that have been fought for child abuse material. And we have ostensibly all these law enforcement entities that are arresting child traffickers, and you've got all these anti-trafficking organizations, NGOs, but yet a fraction of 1% of these. If you're a psychopath, and this would be the area that you'd want to get into, because there's such a small number of people that are actually getting even charged.
Wow, that's unreal.
And here's there's a number of things why Epstein is so important, but so we've got these millions of Americans that have been molested and also trafficked, millions. And if we allow the Department of Justice to be apathetic and unresponsive to victims in a proven trafficking case, the Epstein trafficking case, that sends a message to millions of victims that they have no voice and no hope for justice.
Demoralizing, sort of a humiliation ritual almost.
Can you imagine being a victim of this type of abuse and then watching all these people that molested these kids with Epstein walking? I mean, that would be totally demoralizing.
Right. Yeah, well, maybe that's part of the what's going on, is to discourage people from thinking, you'll ever get any justice. So that makes sense, actually, from a dark perspective there.
It's quite appalling, and I'm glad that we've been working at Epstein Justice we got our 501c3 a couple years ago, and it's been slow going, but now we're picking up momentum. And Americans are fundamentally decent people. I really believe that. And they want to do the right thing. I think a lot of them have been conditioned to think that they can't make a difference. And I think that was a very strong pull for Trump, is they thought that Trump could make a difference.
Yes, absolutely. Right.
And now they're seeing that Trump is, I mean, he did some things early on with Elon Musk, who's also said some very unbecoming things about Trump in this area. But what we're seeing is Trump going back to this same old cover-up that there's been 4 administrations that have covered this up, 2 Republican and 2 Democratic. So when you see, I mean, that's how important it is, and that's how rife our political system is with blackmail. Is if it's covered up by both the Democrats and the Republicans, because both the Democrats and
it's a uniparty,
are compromised. Yeah,
absolutely. Well, Nick, thank you so much for coming on. I appreciate you giving us your take. You're an expert on this situation, and I'm going to have all of Nick's links below, including to get his books, including to check out his podcast and the Justice for Epstein website as well. Nick, thank you so much for coming on, and I look forward to a future podcast where we talk about God and philosophy.
I'm looking forward to that, Jay. It's a much easier topic to talk about.
Yeah, that's a little less heavy, but maybe it's heavy in a different way. But thank you so much, Nick.
Okay, Jay, have a great day.
You too, man. Bye.